close your eyes and imagine an arrogant billionaire heiress who thinks she can control everything meets the one man who refuses to be controlled. Madison Blackwell built walls around her heart that no man has ever been able to break, until Jake Rodriguez walks into her penthouse. He's supposed to protect her body, but who's going to protect her heart when this dangerous ex-military bodyguard decides he wants so much more than just her safety? This is The Arrogant Heiress and the Handsome Bodyguard, a steamy romance story that will leave you breathless and begging for more. If you're ready for a story that will set your pulse racing and ignite your dreams, then subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Because trust me, after you hear how Madison and Jake's story unfolds, you'll be counting the minutes until my next upload. Now, let's begin this intoxicating journey together. Madison Blackwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal glass of vintage champagne. The city sprawled below her like a kingdom. She ruled with an iron fist wrapped in designer silk. At 25, she had already earned a reputation that preceded her into every boardroom, every charity gala, every social gathering where New York's elite mingled. Beautiful, brilliant, and ruthlessly arrogant. That's how the tabloid described her, and Madison wore those words like a badge of honor. Her raven black hair cascaded in perfect waves down her back, framing a face that could launch 1,000 ships or destroy a man's career with a single withering glance. Tonight, she wore a form-fitting black dress that hugged every curve of her athletic figure, a result of years of private yoga sessions and Pilates classes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that commanded attention. It was the way she carried herself, like a queen surveying her domain, knowing that everyone around her was desperately trying to either impress her or tear her down. Miss Blackwell, came a voice from behind her, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as dangerous. Your father sent me. Madison didn't turn around immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of her champagne, savoring both the expensive bubbles and the moment of control. She had been expecting this, her father's latest attempt to control her life disguised as concern for her safety. The death threats had been escalating, and despite her protest that she could handle herself, Daddy Dearest had insisted on hiring protection. When she finally turned, the champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. The man standing in her living room was nothing like the aging, overweight security guard she had imagined. Jake Rodriguez looked like he had stepped out of an action movie, all 6 feet 3 inches of him radiating a dangerous kind of magnetism that made her pulse quicken despite herself. His dark hair was perfectly styled but not fussy, and his olive skin suggested Spanish heritage mixed with something else entirely intriguing. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, deep brown, almost black, with an intensity that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed armor. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that did nothing to hide the powerful build beneath. His shoulders were broad enough to make her wonder what they would feel like under her hands. And when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who knew exactly how lethal he could be. You must be my new babysitter, Madison said, her voice dripping with disdain even as her body responded to his presence in ways she absolutely refused to acknowledge. She set down her champagne glass with deliberate precision and moved toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown to battle. I'm Jake Rodriguez, your security consultant, he replied, his voice maintaining that maddeningly calm tone that suggested nothing she could say or do would rattle him. And I'm not here to babysit anyone. I'm here to keep you alive. Madison laughed, a sound like silver bells wrapped in barbed wire. How dramatic. Tell me, Mr. Rodriguez, what makes you think I need keeping alive? Do I look helpless to you? She was close enough now to catch a scent, something clean and masculine with a hint of danger that made her want to step closer and run away simultaneously. His eyes tracked her movement, and she caught the brief flicker of something that might have been appreciation before his professional mask slid back into place. Looks can be deceiving, Miss Blackwell, Jake said, and there was something in the way he said her name that made heat pool in her stomach. But the 3 death threats your father showed me aren't. Neither is the break-in at your office last week that you failed to report to police. The mention of the break-in wiped the smug smile from Madison's face. How did he know about that? She had been so careful to keep it quiet, handling it through private security to avoid any media attention. "You've done your homework," she admitted, circling him slowly like a shark scenting blood. "But here's what your homework didn't teach you, Mr. Rodriguez. I don't take orders from anyone, especially not from some hired muscle my father thinks can control me." Jake's lips curved into what might have been a smile if there had been any warmth in it. "I'm not here to control you, princess. I'm here to make sure nobody kills you while you're being stubborn about accepting help." The casual use of princess made her blood sing with fury and something else entirely more dangerous. Nobody called her princess. Nobody dared to speak to her with such casual disrespect. She was Madison Blackwell. Men worshipped her, feared her, desired her, but they never, ever dismissed her. "Did you just call me princess?" Her voice was soft, deadly, the tone that had reduced grown men to stammers and apologies. "If the tiara fits," Jake replied, completely unmoved by her barely controlled rage. Before Madison could process what she was doing, she had closed the distance between them until they were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her hand shot out to slap him for his insolence, but faster than lightning. His fingers wrapped around her wrist, holding her hand mere inches from his cheek. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm and straight to her core. His grip was firm but not painful, and suddenly she was very aware of how much larger he was than her, how easily he could overpower her if he chose to. But it wasn't fear that made her breath catch. It was the way he was looking at her, like he could see past all her walls of the woman she kept hidden underneath. "I wouldn't recommend that," Jake said quietly, his thumb brushing across the sensitive skin of her inner wrist, where her pulse was hammering like a hummingbird's wings. "I don't hit back, but I also don't let anyone, not even spoiled little rich girls, assault me." They stood frozen like that for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, her hand trapped in his, her body betraying her by swaying slightly toward his warmth. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the controlled strength in his grip, could smell that intoxicating masculine scent that was making her think very unprofessional thoughts about her new bodyguard. Then the moment shattered as Jake released her wrist and stepped back, his expression returning to that maddeningly professional neutrality. "Your father hired me because someone wants you dead, Miss Blackwell," he said, straightening his tie with hands that were perfectly steady while hers were trembling with residual anger and unwanted arousal. "You can make this easy or you can make this difficult, but either way, I'm going to do my job. The question is whether you're going to help me keep you safe or whether you're going to fight me every step of the way and make us both miserable." Madison rubbed her wrist where she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch, try to regain her composure. No man had ever handled her so casually, so confidently. It should have infuriated her, and it did. But it also awakened something she had thought she had buried long ago. "Fine," she said finally, proud that her voice only shook slightly. "But we do this my way. I have a life, Mr. Rodriguez. I have obligations, social events, business meetings. I won't become a prisoner in my own home just because some coward sends threatening letters." "Understood," Jake nodded. "But when I say move, you move. When I say stop, you stop. When I say get down, you hit the floor and ask questions later. Your life depends on trusting me completely, even when you don't want to." The way he said, "trusting me completely," made images flash through Madison's mind that had nothing to do with personal security and everything to do with the way his hands might feel on her body if she surrendered to him entirely. She was still processing these inappropriate thoughts when the lights in her penthouse suddenly went out, plunging them into darkness. In the split second of blindness, she heard Jake's sharp intake of breath, felt rather than saw him move toward her with predatory speed. "Get down," he commanded, and this time there was no room for argument in his voice. Madison's body obeyed before her mind could protest, dropping to the floor just as Jake's powerful form covered hers, shielding her with his body as the sound of shattering glass echoed through her living room. In the darkness, pressed against the hard planes of his chest, feeling his heart beating steadily against her back while hers raced with terror and adrenaline, Madison realized that her life had just changed forever. And despite the danger, despite her fear, she found herself wondering what other ways Jake Rodriguez might cover her body with his own. The morning sun streamed through the bulletproof glass that had replaced Madison's shattered windows, casting geometric shadows across her penthouse floor. She stood in her walk-in closet, deliberately taking her time selecting the perfect outfit for what she had privately dubbed Operation Destroy Jake Rodriguez's professional composure. After last night's attack, what had turned out to be a sophisticated sniper's bullet meant as a warning rather than a kill shot, Jake had insisted on staying the night. He had set up camp in her guest room, but Madison had been acutely aware of his presence just down the hall. Every creak of the apartment, every shift in the shadows had reminded her that there was a dangerously attractive man sleeping under her roof, a man who had covered her body with his own and made her feel protected for the first time in years. That feeling of vulnerability was exactly what Madison couldn't afford. Vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was something Madison Blackwell had sworn off after her last disastrous relationship. If Jake Rodriguez thought he could waltz into her life and make her feel dependent on him, he had another thing coming. She selected a white silk blouse that was just sheer enough to hint at the lace bra beneath and paired it with a charcoal pencil skirt that hugged her curves like a second skin. The outfit was professional enough for her morning meetings, but designed to test exactly how professional Jake could remain when faced with temptation. Madison emerged from her bedroom to find Jake already dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, standing at her kitchen island with a cup of coffee and what looked like architectural plans of her building spread out before him. He glanced up when she entered, and she caught the brief moment when his eyes traveled the length of her body before snapping back to her face. "Good morning, princess," he said, that infuriating nickname rolling off his tongue like a caress wrapped in mockery. "Sleep well after our excitement last night?" "Like a baby," Madison lied smoothly, moving to the espresso machine with deliberate grace. The truth was she had barely slept, her mind replaying the feel of his hard body pressed against hers, the way his voice had gone rough and commanding when danger threatened. "Though I have to say, your snoring kept me up." Jake's eyebrows rose. "I don't snore." "How would you know? You're asleep when you do it." Madison smiled sweetly as she prepared her coffee, making sure to lean across the counter in a way that drew his attention to the deep V of her blouse. "Maybe you should ask your previous sleeping companions." She caught the slight tightening around his eyes and felt a surge of satisfaction. "Point to Madison. My sleeping arrangements are irrelevant to keeping you safe," Jake replied, his voice carefully neutral, but Madison noticed he had gripped his coffee cup a little tighter. "What's relevant is your schedule today. You have a board meeting at 10, lunch with the mayor's wife at noon, and a charity auction tonight. All of these present security challenges." Madison took a sip of her espresso, studying him over the rim of her cup. "Security challenges? Or opportunities for you to play the overprotective caveman?" "I prefer to think of it as keeping my principle alive," Jake said dryly. "Call me old-fashioned, but I like to finish the jobs I start." The way he said finish made heat pool low in Madison's belly, and she wondered if the double entendre was intentional. Everything about Jake Rodriguez seemed intentional, from the way he positioned himself to always have a clear view of all exits to the way his eyes never quite stopped cataloging potential threats, even when he was looking at her. "Well then, Mr. Rodriguez, let's discuss how this is at work," Madison said, moving closer to him until she was standing just inside his personal space. "I don't change my life for anyone. If you can't keep up with my schedule, maybe Daddy should have hired someone younger." Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. "Try me?" The challenge in his voice sent a thrill through Madison that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. Instead, she reached across him to grab her phone from the counter, making sure her breast brushed against his arm in the process. She felt him go very still, and when she glanced up at him through her lashes, his jaw was tight with control. "Oops," she murmured, not sounding sorry at all. "Careful, princess," Jake said quietly, his voice rough around the edges. "You might not like what happens if you keep playing with fire." "Who says I'm playing?" Madison challenged, tilting her head up to meet his gaze directly. For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension so thick Madison could practically taste it. Jake's eyes dropped to her lips, and she found herself swaying slightly toward him, drawn by the magnetic pull that seemed to exist between them despite her best efforts to resist it. Then Jake stepped back, creating distance between them with the fluid grace of a man who knew exactly how dangerous close contact could be. "Your car will be here in 30 minutes, he said, his voice back to that maddening professional tone. "We'll take my route to your office, and you'll stay within arm's reach of me at all times." Madison felt the sting of rejection, even though she told herself she hadn't wanted him to kiss her anyway. She covered her disappointment with her trademark arrogant smile. How romantic. Most men have to buy me dinner before they insist on staying within arm's reach. Most men aren't trying to keep you from getting killed, Jake replied, rolling up his building plans with military precision. The car ride to Madison's office was an exercise in torture disguised as professional courtesy. Jake had insisted on driving, which put him in the seat next to her in the back of her sleek black sedan, while his partner Tony took the wheel. Madison spent the 20-minute journey testing the limits of Jake's self-control. She started innocently enough, crossing and uncrossing her legs in a way that made her skirt ride up just enough to be distracting. When that didn't get the reaction she wanted, she pretended to take a call and spoke in breathy, suggestive tones about her dinner plans with a fictional male friend. Jake's knuckles went white where they gripped his phone, but his expression remained impassive. Finally, Madison pulled out the big guns. She leaned across him to point out something through the window, pressing her body against his side and letting her perfume, a custom blend that had driven her previous lovers to distraction, envelope him like a cloud of temptation. "See that building?" she murmured, her lips close enough to his ear that her breath caressed his skin. "I closed a $50 million deal there last month. The CEO was so grateful he offered to show me his penthouse. Very private, very spacious." Jake turned his head slightly, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough that Madison could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes and feel the warmth of his breath on her lips. "Is that supposed to make me jealous?" he asked quietly, his voice like velvet over steel. Madison's heart hammered against her ribs. "Is it working?" For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Jake's carefully controlled facade cracked just enough for Madison to glimpse the raw desire underneath. His eyes dropped to her lips, and she found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to close the distance between them. Instead, Jake's hand came up to cup her chin, his thumb brushing across her lower lip with devastating gentleness. "You're going to get us both killed," he said softly, "if you don't stop trying to distract me from doing my job." The touch of his thumb against her lips sent electricity shooting straight to her core, and Madison had to fight the urge to part her lips and draw his thumb into her mouth. The thought of what his reaction would be to such a bold move made her pulse race with dangerous excitement. "Maybe," she whispered, "I'm not trying to distract you from your job. Maybe I'm trying to give you a different kind of job entirely." Jake's eyes went molten, and for a moment Madison thought she had finally pushed him past his breaking point. Then the car slowed, and Tony's voice came from the front seat. "We're here, boss." Jake released her chin and moved back to the side of the seat, so smoothly that Madison wondered if she'd imagined the entire charged moment between them. "Showtime, princess," he said, straightening his tie with hands that were perfectly steady, while hers were trembling with unfulfilled desire. "Try not to get yourself killed at the board meeting." As they walked into Madison's office building, Jake's hand settled possessively on the small of her back, guiding her through the lobby with the confidence of a man who knew exactly how to handle dangerous situations. The warmth of his palm burned through the silk of her blouse, and Madison found herself wondering what those hands would feel like on her bare skin. The thought was interrupted when Jake suddenly went rigid beside her, his hand tightening on her back in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with danger. "What is it?" Madison asked quietly, finally understanding that this was not a game. "We got company," Jake murmured, his eyes scanning the lobby with predatory intensity. "And they're not here to admire the architecture." The elevator climbed toward Madison's executive floor in tense silence. Jake's body coiled like a spring ready to unleash deadly force at the first sign of trouble. Madison could feel the change in him. Gone was a man who had been fighting his attraction to her just moments before, replaced by a lethal predator whose sole focus was keeping her alive. "What did you see down there?" Madison asked quietly, surprised to find that her voice was steadier than she felt. "Two men in the lobby who don't belong," Jake replied, his eyes never leaving the elevator's digital display. "They were trying too hard to look casual, and one of them had a bulge under his left arm that wasn't his wallet." Madison's blood ran cold. The reality of her situation. The fact that someone actually wanted her dead was finally sinking in past her armor of arrogance and denial. When the elevator doors opened on the 35th floor, Jake's hand immediately went to her elbow, guiding her quickly toward her office suite. His touch was gentle but firm, and Madison found herself drawing strength from the solid warmth of his presence beside her. "We're going to go straight to your office," Jake murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Lock the door, and I'm going to make some calls. Do not open that door for anyone except me, understood?" Madison nodded, her usual sharp retorts dying on her tongue as the gravity of the situation overwhelmed her need to maintain control of every interaction. Her assistant, Patricia, looked up from her desk with a bright smile that faltered when she saw Jake's grim expression and Madison's unusually subdued demeanor. "Miss Blackwell, your 10 o'clock is already waiting in conference room A and—" "Cancel everything," Madison said curtly, not breaking stride as Jake ushered her toward her private office. "Reschedule all meetings until further notice." Patricia's eyes widened, but years of working for Madison had taught her not to question orders that were delivered in that particular tone. Once inside her office, Jake immediately went to the windows, checking the sight lines and noting potential sniper positions in the buildings across the street. Madison watched him work, noting the way he moved with economical precision, wasting no motion as he secured the space that had been her sanctuary for the past 3 years. "Sit," Jake commanded, gesturing toward the chair behind her massive mahogany desk, away from the windows. For once, Madison obeyed without argument, settling into her leather executive chair and watching as Jake paced the perimeter of her office like a caged panther. He was speaking quietly into his phone, using terms she didn't recognize but that sounded decidedly military. When he ended the call, Jake turned to face her, and Madison was struck by how different he looked in this moment. The polished Bodyguard facade had fallen away, revealing someone harder, more dangerous, scarred by experiences she could only imagine. "My team is handling the situation downstairs," he said, moving the chair across from her desk, but positioning it so he still had a clear view of both the door and the windows. "But we need to talk about upgrading your security protocols." "You mean making me more of a prisoner than I already am?" Madison said, her natural defiance reasserting itself now that the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Jake's jaw tightened. "I mean keeping you alive long enough for us to figure out who wants you dead and why." Something in his tone made Madison study his face more carefully. There was a shadow in his dark eyes, a weight that spoke of losses he carried in battles he couldn't forget. "You say that like you know what it's like to lose someone you were supposed to protect," she said softly. Jake went very still, and Madison immediately regretted her words. She had meant to probe his defenses, to find the chink in his armor that would give her back some measure of control in their relationship. Instead, she had clearly hit something much more painful and personal. "I do," Jake said finally, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to suppress. His name was Marcus Chun, 23 years old, fresh out of college, heir to a tech fortune. I was hired to keep him safe during a business trip to Colombia. Madison felt her heart clench at the pain in Jake's voice. "What happened?" "I let my guard down for 30 seconds, Jake said, staring past her toward the windows but seeing something else entirely. There was a woman, beautiful, charming, seemed harmless enough. While I was distracted by her attempted flirtation, Marcus took a sniper's bullet meant to send a message to his father about a hostile takeover. The words hung in the air between them like a confession, and Madison suddenly understood why Jake had been so resistant to her attempts at seduction. It wasn't just professional ethics. It was survivor's guilt wrapped around a core of self-recrimination that had been eating at him for who knew how long. "That's why you won't let yourself be distracted," Madison said quietly. "That's why you keep pushing me away every time I try to get under your skin." Jake's laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Princess, you've been under my skin since the moment I walked into your penthouse. The difference is, I learned the hard way what happens when I let beautiful women distract me from doing my job." The admission sent heat spiraling through Madison's body, but it was tempered by something she wasn't used to feeling. Genuine sympathy for another person's pain. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "I'm sorry about Marcus, and I'm sorry for the way I've been behaving since you got here. I didn't realize." That I'm human? Jake asked with a rueful smile. That underneath all this professional competence, I'm just a man who's terrified of failing someone else the way I failed him. Madison felt something crack open inside her chest, a fissure in the wall she had built around her heart after her own devastating betrayal. She recognized the look in Jake's eyes because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. The carefully constructed armor of someone who had been hurt too deeply to risk being vulnerable again. You want to know why I'm such a bitch to everyone? Madison asked suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Why I can't let anyone get close without trying to destroy them first. Jake nodded, his attention focused entirely on her now with an intensity that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. His name was Christopher Hartwell, Madison began, her voice steadier than she had expected. Old money, blue blood. Everything my father thought I should want in a husband. We were engaged for 8 months, and I thought, God, I was so stupid. I thought he loved me for me, not for my money or my name or the business connections I could provide. She stood up and moved to the window, needing the distance to tell this story without breaking down completely. 2 weeks before our wedding, I found out he had been feeding information about Blackwell Industries to our biggest competitor. Trade secrets, acquisition plans, confidential financial data. Everything he had learned pillow talk during our most intimate moments. He had been using our relationship as industrial espionage from day one. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle in a way that made Madison's throat tight with unshed tears. So you decided never to let anyone close enough to betray you again. Exactly, Madison whispered, pressing her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Better to be the ice queen bitch who destroys men before they can destroy her than to be the naive little rich girl who gets played by someone she trusted with her heart. And now here I am, Jake said, his voice closer than she expected. When she turned, he was standing just a few feet away, his expression soft with understanding. Another man your father hired, another potential threat to your carefully constructed defenses. Madison nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Jake took a step closer, and then another, until he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes and smell that intoxicating masculine scent that made her want to surrender to desires she had sworn off. For what it's worth, he said quietly, reaching out to brush a strand of hair away from her face with infinite gentleness. Christopher Hartwell was an idiot. Anyone who could have you and choose to betray you instead of cherish you doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. The compliment, delivered with such sincerity after a confession of vulnerability, broke something loose inside Madison's chest. Before she could think better of it, she was reaching for him, her hands fisting in the lapels of his suit jacket as she pulled him down toward her. Their lips met in a kiss that was desperate and hungry, and tinged with all the pain and longing they had both been carrying. Jake's arms came around her, pulling her against the solid warmth of his body as she melted into him with a soft moan of surrender. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Madison found herself pressed back against the window with Jake's powerful body covering hers, protecting her from the world while simultaneously threatening to destroy every defense she had left. Then Jake's phone rang, shattering the moment like a gunshot. They broke apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other with a mixture of desire and terror at what they had just unleashed between them. Jake answered his phone with a voice that was rougher than usual. Rodriguez. Whatever he heard on the other end made his expression go grim. We've got a problem, he said, ending the call and looking at Madison with eyes that had gone hard and professional again. Someone just tried to break into your penthouse, and they left something behind that you need to see. The drive back to Madison's penthouse was a study in controlled tension. Jake sat rigid in the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as he navigated through Manhattan traffic with the precision of a man who had learned to compartmentalize desire in favor of survival. Madison sat beside him in the passenger seat, acutely aware of the space between them that seemed to crackle with unresolved electricity from their interrupted kiss. What exactly did they find at my apartment? Madison asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since they left her office. A photograph, Jake replied, his voice carefully neutral, and a message that suggests whoever is targeting you knows more about your personal life than we initially thought. A chill ran down Madison's spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What kind of photograph? Jake's jaw tightened. One of you sleeping. Taken from inside your bedroom sometime in the past week. The blood drained from Madison's face. Her bedroom was her sanctuary, the one place where she allowed herself to be completely vulnerable. The thought of someone watching her there, violating that intimate space while she was unconscious and defenseless, made her stomach turn with a mixture of fear and rage. "How is that possible?" she whispered. "My building has state-of-the-art security, which is why we're not going back to your penthouse tonight," Jake said grimly. "Or possibly ever, depending on what my team discovers about how they got inside." Madison's world tilted on its axis. "What do you mean we're not going back? That's my home. All of my things are there." "Your things could be replaced," Jake said with brutal honesty. "Your life cannot." They pulled into the underground parking garage of an upscale hotel in Midtown, and Jake guided her toward a private elevator with the efficiency of a man who had done this before. Madison found herself wondering how many other clients he had protected, how many other women he had shepherded to safety while maintaining that professional distance that was driving her slowly insane. The penthouse suite Jake had secured was luxurious but sterile, all neutral colors and expensive furnishings that had no personality or warmth. It felt like a beautiful prison, and Madison's carefully controlled composure finally cracked. "I can't do this," she said, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city she had always thought of as her kingdom. "I can't hide in hotel rooms and live like a fugitive because some psychopath has decided to make me his target." Jake closed and locked the door behind them, engaging multiple security measures before turning to face her. "You can and you will, because the alternative is being dead." "Maybe that would be easier," Madison said bitterly, the weight of her situation finally crushing down on her like a physical force. "At least then I wouldn't have to live in fear every second of every day." The words had barely left her lips when Jake was across the room, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely leash intensity. "Don't you ever say that again," he growled, his dark eyes blazing with an emotion that was far from professional. "Don't you dare give up when I'm trying so hard to keep you safe." The raw emotion in his voice broke through Madison's despair, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this nightmare. Jake was here, solid and strong and utterly committed to protecting her even when she couldn't protect herself. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her where she kept all the feelings she never let anyone see. "I've never been this scared in my life, and I don't know how to handle it." Jake's expression softened, his grip on her shoulders gentling into something that was more caress than restraint. "Being scared doesn't make you weak, princess. It makes you human." The endearment that had once infuriated her now sounded like a prayer on his lips, and Madison found herself swaying toward him, drawn by the promise of strength and comfort she had never allowed herself to need. "I don't know how to be human," she confessed, her hands coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. "I've been performing the role of Madison Blackwell for so long that I don't remember who I really am underneath all the armor." "You're brave," Jake said quietly, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "Braver than you know. You've been fighting battles alone for years, building an empire, while everyone around you is waiting for you to fail. That takes incredible strength." No one had ever seen her that way before, as strong rather than cold, brave rather than bitchy. The validation from this man who had seen her at her worst and her most vulnerable was more intoxicating than any drug. "Jake," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing that only he could give it to her. He seemed to understand the unspoken plea in her voice because his other hand came up to cup her face, holding her like she was something precious and breakable. "We can't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, and his thumb was tracing patterns on her skin that were making it impossible for her to think clearly. "Why not?" Madison asked, pressing closer until her body was flush against his, until she could feel every hard plane and angle of his muscle frame. "We could die tomorrow. Hell, we could die tonight if whoever is after me figures out where we are. Don't you think we deserve to feel something real before that happens?" Jake's control was visibly fraying, his breath coming faster as Madison's hands explored the broad expanse of his chest through his shirt. "Madison, I need you." she said simply, the words more honest than anything she had ever spoken. Not as my bodyguard, not as someone my father hired, but as the man who makes me feel safe enough to be vulnerable. I need you to make me forget about everything outside this room just for tonight. The last thread of Jake's professional restraint snapped. With a low groan that sounded like surrender and salvation all at once, he lowered his mouth to hers, claiming her lips in a kiss that was hungry and desperate and tinged with the knowledge that this might be all they ever had. Madison melted into him, all her defenses crumbling as Jake's hands tangled in her hair, and his mouth moved against hers with barely leashed passion. She could taste his need, his fear for her safety, his own desperate desire to forget the dangers that surrounded them and lose himself in the heat they generated together. When they broke apart to breathe, Jake's eyes were molten with desire and something deeper that made Madison's heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with physical attraction. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with restraint. "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Everything changes." Madison answered by pulling his head down to hers, pouring all of her longing and fear and desperate need into another searing kiss that left no doubt about what she wanted. Jake lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the bedroom with determined strides while never breaking their connection. Madison wrapped her legs around his waist, reveling in the feeling of being surrounded by his strength, protected by his power, cherished by his touch. He set her down beside the king-size bed with infinite gentleness, his hands framing her face as he looked into her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "So perfect it hurts to look at you sometimes." Madison's heart clenched at the raw honesty in his words. No one had ever looked at her the way Jake was looking at her now, like she was a miracle he didn't deserve but couldn't resist. "I'm not perfect," she said softly, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt with trembling fingers. "I'm complicated and difficult, and probably more trouble than I'm worth." "You're worth everything," Jake replied without hesitation, his own hands finding the zipper at the back of her dress. "You're worth every risk, every complication, every moment of trouble. You're worth dying for." The dress pulled at her feet, leaving her standing before him in nothing but black lace lingerie that made his breathing turn ragged. Jake's hands traced the curve of her waist, her hips, mapping her body with reverent touches that made her skin sing with pleasure. "You're killing me," he groaned against her throat, his lips finding the sensitive spot where her pulse hammered like a hummingbird's wings. "Then let me put you out of your misery," Madison whispered, pushing his shirt off his shoulders and running her hands over the sculpted muscles of his chest and abdomen. Jake's control shattered completely. With a growl of pure need, he pulled her against him, skin to skin, heart to heart, while the city lights twinkled outside their window like 1,000 distant stars bearing witness to the moment when two damaged souls found healing in each other's arms. As they tumbled onto the bed together, lost in passion and desperate for connection, neither of them noticed a shadow that moved across the window of the building across the street or the telephoto lens that captured their silhouettes against a lamplit room. The hunter had found his prey, and tomorrow would bring consequences neither of them could imagine. Madison woke to the sensation of warm lips trailing along her bare shoulder, followed by the rough scrape of stubble against her sensitive skin. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot about the danger that had driven them to this sterile hotel suite. All she knew was the delicious weight of Jake's arm draped across her waist, and the way her body hummed with satisfaction from their night of passionate lovemaking. "Good morning, princess," Jake murmured against her ear, his voice still rough with sleep and desire. "Sleep well." Madison turned in his arms, marveling at how different he looked in the morning light filtering through the curtains. Gone was a controlled, professional bodyguard who never let his guard down. In his place was a man whose dark hair was mussed from her fingers, whose eyes were soft with contentment, whose mouth curved in a smile that was meant only for her. "Better than I have in years," she admitted, tracing lazy patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "Though I have to say, your technique for helping me relax is quite thorough." Jake's laugh was low and rich, vibrating through his chest beneath her palm. "I'm a very dedicated professional. I believe in going above and beyond for my clients." "Is that what I am?" Madison asked, raising an eyebrow as she pressed a kiss to his collarbone. "Your client Jake's expression grew serious, his hand coming up to cup her face with the tenderness that had undone her defenses the night before. Right now, in this moment, you're the woman I can't imagine living without. The woman who makes me want to be better than I am. The declaration made Madison's heart race with emotions she had sworn she would never feel again. This was dangerous territory, the kind of emotional intimacy that had led to her devastation with Christopher. But looking into Jake's eyes, seeing the raw honesty there, she couldn't bring herself to care about the risks. "Jake," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, but knowing she needed to say something to acknowledge the magnitude of what was happening between them. Before she could find the words, Jake's mouth was on hers, kissing her with a passion that was somehow both gentle and consuming. Madison melted into him, her body responding instantly to his touch as if they had been made for each other. "I know this complicates everything," Jake said against her lips, his hands roaming her body with possessive familiarity. "I know it breaks every rule I've ever had about maintaining professional distance, but I can't regret it. Not when touching you feels like coming home." Madison's response was cut off by the insistent buzzing of Jake's phone on the nightstand. He ignored it the first time, too focused on the way Madison's breath caught when he kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear. But when it buzzed again, and then a third time, Jake cursed under his breath and reached for it. "This better be life or death," he growled into the phone, not bothering to hide his irritation at being interrupted. Madison watched his expression change from annoyance to grim concern as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. When he hung up, the professional mask was sliding back into place, and Madison felt a chill of premonition. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up and clutching the sheet to her chest. Jake was already getting out of bed, reaching for his clothes with the efficient movements of a man shifting into crisis mode. "That was Tony. We need to get dressed and get out of here. Now!" "Why? What's happened?" Jake paused in pulling on his pants, his jaw tight with anger that Madison instinctively knew wasn't directed at her. "Someone leaked photos to the press. Pictures of us here, in this room, last night." The blood drained from Madison's face. "What kind of pictures?" "The kind that make it very clear what we were doing," Jake said grimly, tossing her dress to her from where it lay crumpled on the floor. "They're already online. Your father's assistant has been calling nonstop, and there's a crowd of paparazzi gathering in the hotel lobby." Madison felt sick. Her private moment with Jake, the first time she had allowed herself to be truly vulnerable with someone in years, had been turned into tabloid fodder. The violation felt almost worse than the break-in at her penthouse. "How did they get pictures?" she asked, scrambling into her clothes with hands that shook with rage and humiliation. "We're 30 stories up. Professional telephoto lens from the building across the street," Jake replied, checking his weapon before holstering it beneath his jacket. "Which means whoever is targeting you has resources and connections we underestimated." The implications hit Madison like a physical blow. This wasn't random, was it? Someone wanted those pictures taken. Someone wanted to destroy my reputation and compromise your ability to protect me. Jake nodded grimly. "It's a classic tactic. Discredit the bodyguard by making it look like he's more interested in sleeping with his client than keeping her safe, and destroy your reputation in the process." "My father is going to kill me," Madison said, pressing her palms against her temples as the full scope of the disaster crashed over her. "The board will use this as ammunition to question my fitness to run the company. Every business rival I have will see this as weakness they can exploit." "Hey!" Jake's hands were suddenly on her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We'll handle this. We'll figure out who's behind it, and we'll make them pay. But right now, we need to focus on getting out of here safely." Madison wanted to take comfort in his confidence, but the weight of what they had unleashed was crushing down on her. In one night of passion, they had handed her enemies a weapon that could destroy everything she had worked for. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said quietly, the words cutting through the air between them like a blade. "Maybe we should have kept things professional." Jake's hands tightened on her shoulders. "Do you regret last night?" Madison looked into his eyes, saw the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind his professional mask, and found she couldn't lie to him even if it would make things easier. "No," she whispered. "I regret the consequences, but I don't regret being with you." I just don't know how we come back from this. Jake's expression softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. We come back from this by refusing to let them win, by not giving them the satisfaction of tearing apart what we found together. Madison closed her eyes and let herself absorb his strength for one more moment before the outside world crashed back in. She could hear the distant sound of voices in the hallway, the ding of elevator bells, the controlled chaos that meant her carefully ordered life was about to become a media circus. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, releasing her reluctantly. Madison straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and summoned the Ice Queen persona that had served as her armor for so many years. If the world wanted to see her as the arrogant heiress who seduced her bodyguard, then she would give them a performance they would never forget. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Let's go face the wolves." Jake's admiration for her courage was clear in his eyes. But there was something else there too, a shadow of pain that suggested he understood exactly what putting her armor back on would cost both of them. They made their way to the service elevator, avoiding the main lobby where photographers were undoubtedly waiting. But as they stepped into the underground parking garage, Madison realized their night of passion had cost them more than their privacy. A black sedan was waiting for them, and the man who stepped out of the driver's side was someone Madison recognized with a sinking heart. Her father's head of security, Vincent Morrison. "Miss Blackwell," Vincent said formally, his expression carefully neutral. "Your father would like to see you." Immediately, Madison felt Jake tense beside her, his body shifting into protective mode even as she realized that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment the first photo went online. "And what about Mr. Rodriguez?" Madison asked, her voice giving nothing away. Vincent's smile was cold as winter. "Mr. Rodriguez's services are no longer required. Someone else will be taking over your protection detail effective immediately." The words hit Madison like a physical blow, but it was a look of resignation in Jake's eyes that truly broke her heart. He had known this moment was coming, had probably been expecting it since the phone rang that morning. "I see," Madison said quietly, feeling the last pieces of her heart crumble even as she maintained her composure. "Then I suppose this is goodbye." Jake stepped forward, and for a moment Madison thought he might fight for them, might refuse to walk away from what they had found together. Instead, he leaned down and brushed a soft kiss across her forehead. "Take care of yourself, princess," he whispered against her hair. "And remember, you're stronger than you know." Then he was walking away, disappearing into shadows of the parking garage like a ghost, leaving Madison alone with the wreckage of a night that had promised everything and delivered heartbreak instead. As Vincent held open the car door, waiting for her to get in and face her father's wrath, Madison realized that losing Jake hurt worse than any betrayal she had ever experienced. Because this time, she hadn't been betrayed by love. She had been separated from it just when she had finally learned what it meant to feel truly alive. The mahogany doors to Richard Blackwell's private office felt heavier than usual as Madison pushed them open, stepping into the lion's den where her father waited with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. The massive corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, had always been a symbol of power and success to Madison. Today, it felt like a courtroom where she was about to be sentenced. Richard Blackwell sat behind his antique desk like a king on his throne, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, his steel-gray eyes cold with disappointment and barely controlled fury. At 62, he was still an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of commanding presence that made competitors nervous and employees scramble to please him. "Sit down, Madison," he said without looking up from the tablet in his hands, his voice carrying the tone that had terrorized boardrooms and broken lesser men's spirits. Madison remained standing, her chin lifted in defiance even though her heart was pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cower, no matter how badly she was hurting from Jake's forced departure. "I prefer to stand," she replied coolly, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil raging inside her. Richard finally looked up, his gaze sweeping over her with the clinical assessment of a man evaluating damaged merchandise. "I suppose you know why you're here. I assume it has something to do with the tabloid photos that someone was kind enough to share with the world." Madison said, her tone dripping with sarcasm even as shame burned in her chest. Kind enough. Richard's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his control facade. Madison, do you have any idea what you've done? What this scandal is going to cost us? He turned the tablet toward her, and Madison's stomach churned as she saw the headline splash across every major gossip site and newspaper. Billionaire heiress seduces her bodyguard. Madison Blackwell's hotel room romp. Princess and protector, a steamy affair. The photos were grainy but unmistakably intimate. Silhouettes against a hotel room window that left nothing to the imagination about what had transpired between her and Jake. The board is an emergency session as we speak, Richard continued, his voice growing colder with each word. 3 major investors have already called to express their concerns about your judgment and fitness to lead this company. Our stock price dropped 4 points in pre-market trading. Madison felt the walls closing in around her, but she refused to show weakness. So some old men in expensive suits are clutching their pearls because I had a private moment with someone I care about. That's their problem, not mine. Someone you care about? Richard's laugh was bitter and harsh. Madison, wake up. You were played by a professional con artist who saw an opportunity and took it. What are you talking about? Madison's composure cracked slightly, confusion replacing her defiant anger. Richard opened a manila folder on his desk and spread several documents across its surface. Jake Rodriguez. Real name, Javier Morales. Former military, yes, but dishonorably discharged for conduct unbecoming an officer. He's been investigated by 3 different agencies for compromising his clients. Madison's blood turned to ice water in her veins. That's impossible. You're lying. Bank records show he received a payment of $50,000 2 days ago from an offshore account we've traced to Hartwell Industries. Richard continued relentlessly, each word hitting Madison like a physical blow. Your ex-fiancé Christopher hired him to seduce you and compromise your reputation. The room started to spin around Madison as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami of betrayal. Christopher, the man who had already destroyed her ability to trust, was still pulling strings from the shadows, still finding new ways to hurt her years after their relationship had ended. No, she whispered, sinking into the chair she had refused to occupy moments before. No, that's not. Jake wouldn't. Look at the evidence, Madison, Richard said, his voice gentling slightly now that he saw her defenses crumbling. The timing is too perfect. The photos were taken by a professional photographer Christopher hired. The whole thing was orchestrated to destroy your credibility and weaken your position with the board. Madison stared at the bank records, at Jake's real name typed in cold black ink, at the damning evidence that suggested everything she had felt with him was a lie. The vulnerability she had shared, the walls she had torn down, the way he had made her feel cherished and protected, all of it had been an act. He said he cared about me, she said quietly, her voice breaking on the words. He said I was worth everything. He's very good at his job, Richard replied with brutal honesty. Christopher chose well when he hired him to break down your defenses. The pain in Madison's chest was so acute, she could barely breathe. She had sworn after Christopher's betrayal that she would never be vulnerable again, never trust anyone enough to give him the power to destroy her. And yet she had done exactly that with Jake, had handed him her heart on a silver platter and watched him serve it up to her enemies. Where is he now? Madison asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her was screaming. Gone. Vincent escorted him out of the building with instructions never to contact you again. We've also initiated legal proceedings for breach of contract and fraud. Madison nodded numbly, the business side of her brain automatically cataloging the damage, control measures that would need to be taken. But underneath the professional calculations, her heart was breaking into pieces so small she wondered if they could ever be put back together. What happens now? She asked, standing on unsteady legs. Now you go home, clean up this mess, and prove to the board that you're still capable of leading this company, Richard said, his voice returning to its usual commanding tone. You issue a statement disavowing any romantic involvement with your former employee. You make it clear that his behavior was inappropriate and unwelcome. You become the victim instead of the willing participant. The suggestion made Madison's stomach turn. Even believing Jake had betrayed her, the thought of publicly humiliating him felt wrong. But then she remembered the photos, the evidence, the careful way he had maneuvered her into trusting him, and her sympathy curdled into rage. "Fine," she said, her voice as cold as Arctic ice. "But I want to handle this my way." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's my girl. Show them the Madison Blackwell, who built an empire before she was 30. Show them that you're not some lovesick fool who can be manipulated by a pretty face and smooth words." Madison walked toward the door, her spine straight and her head held high, every inch the ice queen who had earned her reputation through ruthless determination and emotional invulnerability. But as she reached for the door handle, Richard's voice stopped her. "Madison," he said, and for the first time that morning, there was genuine concern in his tone. "I know this hurts. I know you thought you had feelings for him. But men like that, they're professionals at making women fall for them. Don't blame yourself for being human." Madison turned back to look at her father, seeing something almost like sympathy in his steel-gray eyes. For a moment, she was tempted to break down, to let him comfort her the way he had when she was a little girl with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Instead, she smiled with all the warmth of Glacier. "I'm not human anymore, Daddy," she said quietly. "I'm a Blackwell, and Blackwells don't let anyone destroy them twice." The drive back to her penthouse passed in a blur of rage and heartbreak. By the time Madison reached her apartment, the initial shock had crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. A fury so pure it burned away every soft feeling she had ever harbored for Jake Rodriguez or Javier Morales, or whatever his real name was. She spent the afternoon crafting the perfect response to the scandal, a statement that portrayed her as the wrong party, while systematically destroying Jake's reputation. She made calls to her media contacts, her lawyers, her public relations team, building a narrative that would not only protect her, but obliterate the man who had dared to play games with her heart. 3 months later, Madison Blackwell was more feared and respected than ever. The scandal had been spun into a story of a strong woman who had overcome a predator's manipulation, and her handling of the crisis had actually strengthened her position with the board. But late at night, alone in her renovated penthouse with its new bulletproof windows and upgraded security system, Madison sometimes found herself staring at her phone, fighting the urge to call a number that had been disconnected weeks ago. She told herself she was better off without him, that discovering his betrayal had saved her from making an even bigger mistake. She almost believed it, until the night she received a phone call that would change everything she thought she knew about Jake Rodriguez and the man who had really orchestrated her downfall. The underground parking garage beneath Madison's office building was dimly lit and eerily quiet at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Most of the building's occupants had gone home hours ago, leaving only the security guards and the occasional workaholic burning the midnight oil. Madison's heels echoed against the concrete as she walked toward her car, her mind still occupied with the merger documents she had been reviewing upstairs. 3 months of throwing herself into work with ruthless intensity had paid off. The scandal with Jake was old news, replaced by newer gossip and fresher meat for the tabloid wolves to devour. Madison had emerged stronger, colder, more untouchable than ever, exactly the way she preferred it. She was fumbling with her car keys when she heard the footsteps behind her, moving too quickly to be casual, too purposeful to be coincidental. Madison's blood turned to ice as she remembered her father's warnings about relaxing her security protocols too soon. The original threats against her life had never been resolved, merely overshadowed by the media circus surrounding her affair with Jake. "Miss Blackwell," came a voice in the shadows, smooth and cultured with a slight accent she couldn't place. "How lovely to finally meet you in person." Madison spun around to see 3 men emerging from behind the concrete pillars, their movements coordinated with the precision of a military unit. The one in the center was tall and lean, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that reminded her unpleasantly of a shark sizing up its prey. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Madison asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. Her hand moved slowly toward her purse where she kept the panic button Jake had insisted she carry. "Not yet." The man replied with a smile that never reached his eyes. "But you knew my employer quite well." Christopher Hartwell sends his regards. Madison's heart stopped. Christopher. Even now, years after their broken engagement, he was still finding ways to reach out from the shadows and try to destroy her life. "What do you want?" she demanded, abandoning any pretense of politeness. "Justice," the man said simply. "Mr. Hartwell's reputation was severely damaged by your accusations of industrial espionage. His family's company nearly went bankrupt because of the lawsuits and criminal investigations you initiated. He spent the last few years rebuilding, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to return the favor." "So this is about revenge," Madison said. Try to keep him talking while she calculated her chances of reaching the elevator or the emergency exit. Both seemed impossibly far away. "This is about balance," the man corrected. "You destroyed his life, so now he's going to destroy yours, starting with your reputation, then your company, and finally..." He let the sentence hang in the air like a threat. Madison's hand found the panic button in her purse, just as the man nodded to his companions. They moved toward her with predatory grace, and Madison realized with crystal clarity that she was going to die in this cold, anonymous parking garage, alone and unloved because she had been too proud and too scared to fight for the one man who had ever made her feel truly alive. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the garage as a black motorcycle roared down the ramp, its headlight cutting through the dim lighting like a sword. The bike skidded to a stop between Madison and her attackers, and the rider swung off with fluid grace that made Madison's heart leap with impossible hope. Jake Rodriguez, or whatever his real name was, stood before her like an avenging angel, his dark hair longer than she remembered, his face harder, his eyes blazing with a fury that was both beautiful and terrifying. He wore black leather and moved with the deadly precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Gentlemen," Jake said conversationally, as if he had encountered them at a cocktail party rather than a kidnapping attempt, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Javier Morales, the silver-haired man, said with genuine surprise, "I thought you were dead." "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Jake replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the hairs on Madison's arms stand up. "Though the same can't be said for what's going to happen to you if you don't walk away right now. You're outnumbered 3-1, the man pointed out, though his confident posture had shifted slightly, suggesting he knew exactly how dangerous Jake could be even at those odds. Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. "I like those odds." What happened next unfolded with the brutal efficiency of a choreographed dance. Jake moved like liquid violence, taking down the first man with a combination of strikes that left him crumpled on the concrete before Madison could even process what she was seeing. The second attacker managed to draw a gun, but Jake was already inside his guard, disarming him with a move that ended with a distinct sound of breaking bones. The silver-haired leader proved more formidable, producing a knife and engaging Jake in a deadly ballet of thrust and parry that had Madison pressing herself against her car, terrified that one wrong move would end with Jake bleeding out on the parking garage floor. But Jake was magnificent in his fury, fighting with the skill of a man trained for war and the desperation of someone protecting the most important thing in his world. When the knife went flying across the concrete and the silver-haired man joined the companions in unconsciousness, Jake stood breathing hard among the wreckage, his eyes immediately seeking Madison. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with adrenaline and concern. Madison stared at him, her mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. 3 months of believing he had betrayed her. 3 months of building walls against the pain of his abandonment. 3 months of telling herself she was better off without him. All of it crumbled in the face of the simple truth that he had come back for her. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. Jake took a step toward her, then stopped as if afraid she might bolt. "Because I never stopped protecting you, even after your father fired me. Because I've been tracking Christopher's hired killers for months, trying to stay one step ahead of them. Because when I realized they were finally making their move tonight, nothing in hell could have kept me away." "But the evidence," Madison said, confusion and hope warring in her chest. "The bank records, the fake name, the money from Christopher..." Jake's expression grew pained. "All fabricated. Your father needed a reason to get rid of me that you wouldn't fight. So he manufactured evidence of betrayal. The real betrayal was that I let him do it instead of fighting for us." The words hit Madison like a physical blow. Her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, had been the one to orchestrate the cruelest betrayal of all, destroying her chance of happiness to maintain his control over her life. "He lied to me," she said, the magnitude of the deception stealing her breath. "He made me believe you had used me, that everything between us was fake." "Nothing between us was fake," Jake said fiercely, taking another step closer. "Every moment, every touch, every word I said about caring for you, it was all real, more real than anything I've ever felt in my life." Madison looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, blazing like a beacon in the darkness that had surrounded her for months. He had never betrayed her. He had been protecting her from the shadows while she had been hating him, building a fortress around her heart to keep out the very love she had been desperate to find. "I destroyed you," she whispered, remembering the press conference where she portrayed him as a predator, the legal action she had initiated, the systematic dismantling of his reputation. "I said terrible things about you. I ruined your life." Jake's smile was soft and infinitely forgiving. "You protected yourself the only way you knew how. I don't blame you for believing evidence that was designed to be convincing. I blame myself for walking away instead of fighting harder to make you see the truth." The sound of sirens in the distance reminded them both that they were standing in a parking garage with 3 unconscious men and a lot of explaining to do. "We need to go," Jake said, glancing toward the ramp. "Christopher's people won't give up just because these 3 failed. And your father's going to be very unhappy when he finds out I'm back." Madison looked at the motorcycle, then at Jake's extended hand, then at the unconscious men who had been sent to destroy her life. The choice should have been easy, but 3 months of betrayal and heartbreak had made her cautious about trusting anyone, even a man who had just saved her life. "How do I know this is another manipulation?" she asked, hating herself for the question but needing to ask it anyway. "How do I know you're not working for someone else, playing some deeper game I can't see?" Jake's hand dropped to his side, and the pain in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "You don't," he said simply. "After everything that's happened, you have every right not to trust me. All I can do is promise you that I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that my love for you is real." The word love hung between them like a bridge Madison wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. But as the sirens grew louder and the reality of her situation crystallized, she realized that Jake Rodriguez was the only person in her life who had ever put her safety above his own interests. "If we do this," she said, taking a tentative step toward him, "if I get on that bike with you, where does that leave us?" Jake's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Wherever you wanted to leave us, princess. I'm not going anywhere ever again." Madison looked one last time at the safe, predictable world she would be leaving behind. Her father's control, the board's expectations, the lonely penthouse where she had spent 3 months convincing herself she didn't need anyone. Then she took Jake's hand and let him help her onto the back of his motorcycle, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding on tight as they roared up the ramp and into an uncertain but infinitely more hopeful future. The safe house was a modest cabin nestled in the Catskill Mountains, far from the glittering towers of Manhattan and the web of lies that had nearly destroyed them both. Jake had driven through the night, Madison's arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her face pressed against his leather jacket as they left the chaos of the city behind. Now, as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, they finally had the privacy and safety they needed to confront the truth about everything that had torn them apart. Madison stood at the cabin's large picture window, watching the morning mist rise from the lake below, while Jake built a fire in the stone fireplace. She was still wearing the designer dress and heels she had put on for work yesterday, but they felt like a costume now, remnants of a life that no longer seemed to fit. "Your father will be looking for you," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the small space. "He'll have every resource at his disposal focused on bringing you back." Madison didn't turn around, but Jake could see her reflection in the window glass, the way her shoulders tensed at the mention of Richard Blackwell, the man she had trusted above all others who had betrayed her in the cruelest possible way. "Let him look," she said, her voice steady but edged with the pain that made Jake's chest tighten. "I'm not going back to that life. Not after what he did to us." Jake finished with the fire and moved to stand behind her, close enough to offer comfort, but not touching, still uncertain of where they stood after months of separation and lies. "Madison," he said softly, "we need to talk about what happens next. Christopher's people won't give up, and your father's going to use every weapon in his arsenal to discredit me and force you to come home." "Then we fight back," Madison replied, finally turning to face him. In the soft morning light, Jake could see the exhaustion in her beautiful face, the toll that 3 months of believing herself betrayed had taken on her spirit. But there was something else there too, a determination that reminded him why he had fallen in love with her strength as much as her beauty. "We?" Jake asked, hope and wariness warring in his voice. Madison took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his. "You saved my life last night. You've been protecting me from the shadows for months, while I was publicly destroying your reputation. You could have walked away, could have let Christopher's men finish what they started, but you didn't. You came back for me." "I never left," Jake said roughly, his control finally cracking as the emotions he suppressed for months threatened to overwhelm him. "Even when your father showed me those fake bank records, even when you stood in front of those cameras and called me a predator, even when every rational part of my brain told me to disappear and start over somewhere else, I couldn't leave you unprotected." Madison's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm so sorry. I should have known you wouldn't betray me. I should have trusted what I felt when I was in your arms." "You had every reason to believe the evidence," Jake said, reaching out to cup her face with hands that trembled slightly. "Your father made sure of that. The fake identity, the manufactured bank records, the carefully constructed timeline, it was all designed to prey on your fears about being used again." "But you knew I would believe it," Madison whispered, leaning into his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "You knew my history with Christopher, knew how easily I could be convinced that another man was playing games with my heart." Jake's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. "I knew you would protect yourself the only way you knew how. I just hoped that someday you would realize the truth and give me a chance to explain." "I want to understand everything," Madison said, her hands coming up to cover his where they cupped her face. "I need to know what really happened, why my father was so desperate to get rid of you that he was willing to break my heart to do it." Jake's expression darkened with a fury that was all the more dangerous for being carefully controlled. "Because I was getting too close to the truth about who was really behind the threats against you." Madison's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" Jake guided her to the leather sofa in front of the fireplace, settling beside her close enough that their knees touched, close enough that she could see the pain in his dark eyes as he prepared to shatter the last of her illusions about the man who had raised her. "The death threats, the break-in at your penthouse, the sniper's bullet through your window. None of it was random," Jake began, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets he had carried alone. "Someone with intimate knowledge of your routines, your security protocols, your personal life was feeding information to Christopher's people." Madison's world tilted on its axis as the implications hit her. "You think someone inside my father's organization was working with Christopher?" "I don't think it, Madison. I know it." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her a series of photographs. Surveillance images of meetings between Christopher Hartwell and a man Madison recognized with growing horror. "Vincent Morrison," she breathed, staring at her father's head of security shaking hands with her ex-fiancé. "But that's impossible. Vincent has worked for my family for 15 years. 15 years of building trust, gaining access to your most private moments, learning exactly how to hurt you where it would do the most damage." Jake said grimly, "Christopher didn't just want to destroy your business, Madison. He wanted to destroy your soul. And Vincent was his inside man from the beginning." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Madison felt physically sick. Vincent had been there when she cried over her broken engagement to Christopher. He had held her hand at her mother's funeral. He had been like an uncle to her, a trusted confidant who knew all her secrets and fears. "But why?" she whispered. "Why would Vincent betray us?" "Money," Jake said simply. "Christopher paid him $2 million over the past 3 years to provide intelligence and create opportunities for his people to get close to you. The break-in at your penthouse? Vincent disabled the security system. The hotel where we spent the night? Vincent booked it specifically because Christopher had cameras installed in the room across the street. Madison felt the walls of her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Everyone she had trusted, everyone she had believed was protecting her, had been lying to her face while orchestrating her downfall. "And my father?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Jake's hesitation told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. "I don't think he knew about Vincent's betrayal initially. But when I started getting close to the truth, when I began investigating the connection between the attacks and someone inside your security team, your father panicked. He couldn't risk me exposing Vincent because it would prove his incompetence in protecting you. So he destroyed us instead," Madison said, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. "He manufactured evidence to discredit you and drive you away before you could uncover Vincent's betrayal. He chose his pride over your happiness," Jake confirmed, his voice rough with anger. "He was willing to break your heart and leave you vulnerable to continued attacks rather than admit he had been fooled by a man he trusted." Madison stood abruptly, pacing to the window as she struggled to process the magnitude of the deception that had shaped her entire life. Her father, Vincent, Christopher, all of them had been playing games with her safety, her emotions, her future, treating her like a pawn in their twisted power struggles. "I trusted him," she said, her voice breaking on the words. "I trusted my father more than anyone in the world, and he sacrificed my chance at love to protect his own reputation." Jake was behind her in an instant, his arms wrapping around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest with desperate tenderness. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I'm so sorry you had to learn the truth this way." Madison turned in his arms, looking up into the face of the only man who had ever put her welfare above his own interests, who had risked everything to protect her even when she believed the worst of him. "Don't apologize," she said fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt. "You're the only honest person in my life. You're the only one who never lied to me, never used me, never betrayed me for your own gain." Jake's eyes blazed with an emotion so intense it took her breath away. "Madison, I love you," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush of honesty that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I loved you 3 months ago when I thought you had betrayed me, and I love you now knowing that you never stopped protecting me even when I was destroying you. I love your strength, your loyalty, your willingness to sacrifice everything for my safety. I love you, Jake Rodriguez, Javier Morales, or whatever name you want to use. I love the man you are, not the identity you wear." The confession hung between them for a heartbeat that stretched into eternity. Then Jake was kissing her with a passion that was desperate and grateful and full of 3 months' worth of suppressed longing. Madison melted into him, pouring all her love and regret and desperate need into the kiss, trying to show him without words how sorry she was for doubting him, how grateful she was that he had never given up on them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he was afraid this moment might be a dream. "I love you too," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've loved you since the moment you tried to slap me in your penthouse, and I'll love you until the day I die. You're my everything, Madison. My reason for breathing, my reason for fighting, my reason for hoping that maybe I deserve something good in my life after all." Madison's heart swelled with joy so intense, it was almost painful. After years of believing herself unworthy of real love, after months of thinking she had lost her only chance at happiness, she was here in the arms of a man who loved her not despite her flaws, but because of her strength. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware that they were fugitives from her father's reach and Christopher's revenge, that the life she had known was over. Jake's smile was soft and full of promise. "Now we disappear for a while. I have safe houses, new identities, resources your father doesn't know about. We give ourselves time to heal, time to plan, time to figure out how to take down Christopher and Vincent without destroying innocent people in the process." "And after that?" Madison asked, hope blooming in her chest like a flower after a long winter. "After that, we build whatever life you want," Jake said, his hands framing her face with infinite tenderness. "We can disappear forever, start over somewhere new, or we can go back and reclaim what's rightfully yours. The choice is yours, princess. I'm with you either way." Madison looked into his eyes and saw her future there. uncertain, dangerous, but filled with a love that would sustain them through whatever battles lay ahead. "Then let's disappear," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "Let's take some time to be just Madison and Jake, without all the lies and expectations and betrayals. Let's remember what it feels like to be happy." Jake's answering smile was radiant with joy and relief. "I like the sound of that. Just promise me one thing." "Anything," Madison said without hesitation. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter who tries to tear us apart again, you'll remember this moment. Remember that what we have is real and worth fighting for." Madison sealed her promise with a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. Like the first day of a life where love was stronger than lies and truth was more powerful than betrayal. 6 months later, Madison stood on the wraparound porch of a secluded beach house in the Outer Banks, watching the sun paint the Atlantic Ocean in shades of amber and rose. The salty breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the garden she had planted with her own hands, something the old Madison Blackwell would never have imagined doing. But then, the woman she had become in these months of hiding and healing was someone she barely recognized from her former life. Gone was the designer armor and cutting arrogance. In their place was a woman who wore sundresses and went barefoot in the sand, who laughed freely in love without reservation. Jake had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to discover who she really was when she wasn't performing the role of the Ice Queen heiress. "You're thinking too hard again," came a familiar voice from behind her, war with affection and gentle teasing. Madison turned to find Jake approaching with 2 cups of coffee, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing nothing but low-slung jeans that showcased the lean muscles of his chest and abdomen. 6 months of peace had transformed him too. The haunted look in his dark eyes had been replaced by contentment, and he moved with the relaxed confidence of a man who had found his place in the world. "I was thinking about how different everything is," Madison said, accepting her coffee and leaning into his side as he wrapped his free arm around her waist. 6 months ago, I was the most miserable, successful person in New York. Now I'm the happiest fugitive on the East Coast." Jake's laugh rumbled through his chest, a sound that never failed to make Madison's heart skip. "Technically, we're not fugitives anymore. Vincent and Christopher are both in federal prison, thanks to the evidence we turned over to the FBI. Your father's been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing, though his reputation took a hit he'll never fully recover from." Madison's expression grew thoughtful. She had mixed feelings about her father's fate. Part of her still burned with anger over his betrayal, but another part mourned the relationship they had lost forever. Richard Blackwell had called her exactly once since Vincent's arrest, a stilted conversation where he had apologized for his actions, while making it clear he still believed he had acted in her best interests. "Any regrets?" Jake asked quietly, reading her mood with the intuitive understanding that had developed between them over months of intimate companionship. Madison considered the question seriously. Did she regret walking away from Blackwell Industries, from the billions of dollars and the power that had once defined her entire identity? Did she regret choosing love over legacy, passion over prestige? "Only one," she said finally, turning in his arms to face him fully. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that none of that other stuff mattered. I regret wasting years building walls instead of bridges, choosing fear over trust, control over connection." Jake's smile was soft and full of the love that had sustained them through the darkest moments of their journey. "You weren't ready then. We both had to go through everything we went through to get to this place, to become the people who could love each other the way we do now." "Philosophical bodyguard," Madison teased, standing on her toes to brush a kiss across his lips. "I like this side of you." "I have lots of sides you haven't discovered yet," Jake murmured against her mouth, his hands tightening on her waist in a way that sent familiar heat spiraling through her body. "Is that a promise, Mr. Rodriguez?" Madison asked, her voice dropping to the sultry purr that never failed to make Jake's eyes darken with desire. "It's a guarantee, Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake replied, and Madison's heart stopped at the casual way he said the words, as if they were already married, already bound together for life. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she repeated, her pulse racing with excitement and hope. Jake's expression grew suddenly serious, and he stepped back just enough to reach into his pocket. When his hand emerged, it was holding a small velvet box that made Madison's breath catch in her throat. "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, Waiting for perfect moment, Jake said, his voice rough with nervous excitement. But then I realized that every moment with you is perfect, so there's no point in waiting. He dropped to one knee on the weathered porch boards, opening the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring, an emerald-cut diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across Madison's tear-filled eyes. Madison Elizabeth Blackwell, Jake said, his voice steady despite the emotion blazing in his dark eyes. You are the strongest, most beautiful, most infuriating woman I've ever known. You make me want to be better than I am, braver than I thought possible, worthy of the incredible gift of your love. I want to protect you, cherish you, and probably argue with you every day for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me? Madison stared down at him, at this man who had risked everything to save her, who had loved her through betrayal and heartbreak, who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen and accepted for who she was underneath all her armor. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking on the word. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Jake's whoop of joy echoed across the beach as he surged to his feet, lifting Madison off the ground and spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, his hands were shaking as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and Madison marveled at how perfectly it fit, as if it had been made specifically for her. I love you, she said, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good, Jake said, pulling her close again. Love should be a little scary. It means it matters enough to fight for. They had fought for it, Madison reflected as Jake's lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like promises and forever. They had fought through lies and betrayal, through separation and heartbreak, through all the obstacles that life had thrown at them, and they had won. When? Madison asked when they finally broke apart. When do you want to get married? Jake's grin was boyish and infectious. Tomorrow? Next week? Right now if we can find a justice of the peace. Madison laughed at his eagerness, her heart swelling with joy at the knowledge that this incredible man was as impatient as she was to bind their lives together permanently. How about next month, she suggested. Small ceremony, just us and a few close friends. Maybe on the beach at sunset. Perfect, Jake agreed immediately. Though I should warn you, I'm never letting you go again. You're stuck with me forever, princess. The endearment that had once infuriated her now sounded like a love song, and Madison knew she would never tire of hearing it on his lips. Forever sounds perfect to me, she said, sealing the promise with another kiss. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, painting their private world in golden light, Madison and Jake began planning their future together. A future built on truth and trust, passion and partnership, love and loyalty. They talked about the wedding, about whether to stay in their beach house sanctuary or eventually return to New York, about children and dreams and all the adventures that lay ahead. But underneath all the practical discussions was the deeper conversation of two souls who had found their perfect match, two hearts that had learned to beat in synchrony, two lives that were now inextricably entwined. Later, as they walked hand in hand along the shore, Madison's engagement ring sparkling in the sunlight, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The arrogant heiress and the dangerous bodyguard seemed like characters from someone else's story now. Roles they had played before they discovered who they really were beneath all the masks and pretenses. No regrets? Jake asked, echoing her earlier question as they paused to watch dolphins play in the surf. Madison looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the man who would save her in every way a person could be saved. He had rescued her from physical danger, yes, but more importantly, he had rescued her from a life of emotional isolation and spiritual emptiness. He had shown her that love wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all. No regrets, she said firmly, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Only gratitude for every twist and turn that brought us together. Jake's smile was radiant with happiness. Even the bad parts. Especially the bad parts, Madison replied, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. Without them, we never would have learned to appreciate what we have. We never would have fought so hard to protect it. As they continued their walk along the endless beach, planning their wedding and their future, Madison thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, lonely, bitter, armored against love and connection. That woman was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came not from isolation, but from the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. The sun was setting by the time they made their way back to Beach House, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink that reflected off Madison's engagement ring, like a promise of all the beautiful tomorrows to come. They made love that night with a passion that was both desperate and reverent, celebrating not just their engagement but their survival, their triumph over all the forces that tried to tear them apart. And later, as Madison lay in Jake's arms listening to his heartbeat, she finally understood what happiness felt like. It wasn't the cold satisfaction of a business deal well executed or the hollow triumph of defeating an enemy. It was the simple, perfect contentment of being completely known and completely loved by another human being. "Jake?" she whispered into the darkness. He murmured sleepily, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for never giving up on us." His answer came as a kiss pressed to the top of her head, soft and full of all the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. "Thank you for being worth the fight, princess. Thank you for being worth everything." As Madison drifted off to sleep in the arms of her future husband, she smiled at the knowledge that their story was just beginning. The arrogant heiress and the handsome bodyguard had found their happily ever after, but Madison and Jake, the real people underneath all the roles they had played, were embarking on the greatest adventure of all, a lifetime of love.